Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for this week's edition virtually of Inside the Zone alongside Justin Kinney. There he is.
Hey.
Hey, I'm Wayne Sports Director Glenn Marini, and we are talking about week 8, Justin, of the high school football season. We've seen a lot of football now. Before we dive into this week's matchups, kind of what is your biggest takeaway thus far this season? I know last year at this point, we were just simply surprised that we were still playing football and had relatively minimal cancellations, and it seemed like it was going to be a headache. It wasn't. This year, it's gone pretty smoothly, other than, really the Southside Snyder game that got canceled, which now does impact the SAC, as we'll talk about going forward.
Yeah, a little bit, right? So I think something that surprises me or kind of has kind of been the story for me through 7 weeks is the dominance of particular teams in their conferences. When you look at Leo and just how much they've separated themselves from everybody else in the league, and Adams Central, the same in the ACAC, and I think even Eastside from everybody else in the NECC. So usually we have some decent battles in those conferences, whereas at this point, maybe we're looking at maybe a dominant team in the SAC. You could say that's Bishop Luers, but you have two other teams with one loss sitting there, and Snyder still controlling its own destiny, potentially in that week 9 showdown with the Knights. So I think the story to me is just, how much separation there is between the top teams in the other 3 conferences in the area and everybody else.
Yeah, let's move on to the SAC, because you mentioned Bishop Luers a little bit there. What's your takeaway from the Battle of the Bishops? I mean, you can use the cliche throughout the record books, but you had to think Luers went in as the favorite. They answered the bell 41-38 at Bishop Dwenger. What's your takeaway from that game for both Dwenger and for Luers? Because that was a heck of a performance for Dwenger, considering some of the difficulties they faced early on in the season.
Well, I think I came out of that game more impressed with Bishop Dwenger, at least from where they were for a couple weeks there. And we were looking at that the Battle of the Bishops was not going to be close. And then what Bishop Dwenger has been able to do over the last 2 weeks. Everybody was kind of skeptical after Bishop Dwenger came out and dominated Concordia there in week 6. And people were like, well, it was Concordia and consider the opponent. And then they come out and really battle Bishop Luers down to the end, back and forth throughout the game. And, that short field goal that was, fell short, that could have sent the game into overtime. All of a sudden, you're looking at this Bishop Dwenger team, and Bishop Dwenger Snyder this week. Could this be a closer game than we anticipated? Bodie Dickerson has really been able to rejuvenate that offense with his legs and his arm. And I think Bishop Dwenger has kind of loosened the reins a little bit. They came out on Friday night in 4 wide receiver sets, 5 wide receiver sets, and really attacked and went vertical and mixing things up and really giving teams different looks, because instead of packing it in like they were the first 5 weeks of the season and trying to overpower people with short passes and KJ Tippmann, they've been able to expand their offense. And I think it's a little bit everything, not one particular thing, but all of a sudden you look at a Dwenger team that, we have a different opinion of, at least after 7 weeks than we did after 5 weeks.
So Dwenger, Snyder this week, Snyder, Luers next week. Let's talk about the Snyder matchup against Bishop Dwenger this week, because as you mentioned, this is a much more dynamic Snyder team. I mean, putting up 38 points against Bishop Luers is something we really hadn't seen this season. Carroll put up 31 in week 1 against him, but otherwise the defense had been fairly stout for Bishop Luers this season. And for Snyder, at this point last year, we were wondering, man, what's happened to the Panthers? This juggernaut is not doing what we thought they would do. And this year they've completely flipped the script on that and are staring down the barrel of maybe an SAC championship. At the very least, they're in the hunt.
Yeah, you and I were telling anybody that would listen last year, look, this is an aberration. If you're going to beat Snyder, you better do it this year. And at least for all but one team, thus far, that's been the case for Snyder. And it was another, clinic last Friday in the running game. Tyrese Brown, 4 touchdowns, all in the first half. Snyder didn't even really need to pass, but Luke Hoppert threw for, barely 50 yards, just the way they were being able to move the ball on the ground against Northrop. And the defense, too, was another, great performance out of them. So, I think one thing we're missing is from Snyder is maybe that marquee victory. And I think it could come week 9, obviously, against Bishop Luers. But this is a team definitely in the hunt for the SAC championship. And for people that were so quickly to write them off last year, and then, oh, they barely beat Northside in week 1 and they come back and lose, soon after that. Now this team has bounced back and looked phenomenal doing it. And, they have a tough test this Friday against Bishop Dwenger. If they can get past that one, it's all on the line at Lewis Field in week 9.
What's the difference between Snyder this year and Snyder last year? Because it's very stark when you look at record-wise and just kind of the feel around the program as well.
Well, I think it's 2 things. I think it's confidence and experience. I think, at times last year, that team just wasn't a confident football team. And some of that went about because of how young they were at certain positions. And they didn't really have that experience to fall back on because they kind of went young, halfway through the year. So those 2 things, I think you can say, experienced talent as well. These guys are another year older and a lot of experience gained a year ago. So, but if you had to, pinpoint it, I'd say the confidence. I think once they kind of started getting rolling and these guys started getting confidence in themselves and realizing, hey, we can play Snyder football and win football games. I think that was big. And, a team that was young a year ago is now looking like a veteran squad this year, and very much interesting, which we come in this week with Snyder Dwenger. And, whatever happens this week, we're more than likely going to get round 2 in just a couple weeks in sectional play.
Yeah. What do you see as being the biggest difference maker this coming Friday when you're talking about Dwenger and Snyder? Because obviously we've seen the offense as you alluded to, the offense has been improved very much so for Bishop Dwenger in the last few weeks. And Snyder really has been, outside of the one loss, they've been very consistent. Tyrese Brown running the football. And why wouldn't you when you've got DJ Moore and those dudes blocking for you? And really, there were some questions about the secondary at the beginning of the season. They allowed some big plays early, but they really clamped down defensively. So Snyder's starting to put together more of a complete package on both sides of the football, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at this game coming up on Friday, it comes down to the running games in terms of which is able to establish the run, control the football. I thought, maybe an overlooked aspect of the Battle of the Bishops was how Bishop Dwenger was able to control the football with KJ Tippmann and move the chains on the ground and really play keep away from that dangerous Bishop Lures offense. And you would look at Snyder and they're at their best when they can establish Tyrese Brown in the run game, and Bishop Dwenger conversely as well. They're at their best when KJ Tippmann is able to move the chains. So I think that's going to be the key to this one, because then it opens up opportunities in the pass game when you can run the football. The old adage is, you run to set up the pass. But I think with both of these teams, it's absolutely correct because, prolifically, neither of these teams are really going to sling it around the field for 300 yards a game. But man, if defenses have to respect that run and bring an extra safety up, it opens things on the outside, and both teams have wide receivers to make you pay.
In the Northeast 8, we've got Columbia City at Leo, DeKalb at Belmont, New Haven at East Noble, Huntington North at Norwell. East Noble had a tough time with Columbia City last week on the road, 19-16. And obviously, they had lost to Norwell. They had lost to Leo. What does East Noble need to do to get, on the right foot as we inch towards the postseason? And also, can Columbia City, if they, we've seen Greg Bolt put up 60 plus points at a time this season. I know Leo has been a juggernaut, but can they keep it interesting and maybe knock off a team like Leo in week 8 this coming Friday?
They can if they're extremely, extremely physical up front, because that's where it starts for Leo, and that's where they've had truly no equal on the schedule thus far this year is up front. And Columbia City has kind of struggled against physical fronts. And if the Eagles can find something to really hold the trenches and really play even up there, then they have a shot. But, you mentioned, that game, and then you also look at East Noble. I think a big question for East Noble not only is health, when we look at Rowan Zolman and now Kanan Carrico and where they're at going forward, but you can look at East Noble's schedule through 7 weeks and say, okay, they didn't play well against Norwell. They didn't play well for most of the game against Columbia City. They didn't play well in the first half against Leo, and were able to put together a great comeback in the second half. So who is this team really? And it needs 2 weeks to really, straighten some things out, because we all assume they're going to get another shot at Leo in the postseason, but it's a very dangerous sectional with some other dangerous teams. And it's cliche, which every coach says we want to be playing our best football in week 10. And at least going into week 8, I don't think you can say that about East Noble. So they have a lot to figure out over the next 2 weeks before the postseason comes.
Yeah, in my opinion, they're too talented to have the struggles that they've had recently. They're too good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to skip the ACAC this week because it's Adam Central's to lose, and we're going to talk a lot about them. I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot about them in the postseason.
Yeah.
And I hope Michael Mosier probably would hope that goes that way as well. So let's move on to the NECC. I was at the Churubusco Central Noble game last week, the Battle of Borderline. It was a tight game. Central Noble made just a few too many mistakes, and they can ill afford that this week, but perhaps it's something, Hayden Kilgore's team learned from last week and can apply against Eastside. Eastside's obviously the juggernaut, big or small division in that conference. How do you see this one playing out? Because Eastside's got Central Noble and Angola still left on the schedule, but the way that Angola has played this year, Central Noble might be their biggest test before they get to the postseason, and then things get ratcheted up a notch, especially if you see, maybe a Lures on the horizon for Eastside.
This one kind of lost a little of its luster after last week when Churubusco went to Central Noble and beat them, but I think it's still a very dangerous Cougar team, especially if they can have Will Hoover out there and he's, as close to 100% as he can possibly get. But, I think it's a good challenge for Eastside to see where they're at, but maybe conversely with Central Noble. And then when we delve a little bit more into Churubusco and we look at this team and say, okay, they lost week 1 to Columbia City. And it was a pretty lopsided game. But you also look at Churubusco versus Eastside, and they're the closest, other than Adams Central, in terms of giving them a football game, and at Churubusco. So through 2 weeks left in the season, regular season, who knows where Churubusco can be entering the postseason? Could they be a threat to the Flying Jets potentially in that sectional? So, if we're looking at common opponents and we're looking at Eastside and Adams Central and Eastside and Churubusco, you like how the Eagles match up. But while we like, significantly Adams Central in that matchup, I don't think we can overlook Churubusco at this point. And for Eastside, they just need to continue to get better with that Central Noble game. And, the barometer is still Bishop Lures, and they're going to have to play them at some point in that sectional. And they have to be firing on all cylinders. They have to be peaking at that game because they can ill afford to be less than completely locked in when they play the Knights. And they will play the Knights.
I'm not convinced that the best 3 teams in the NECC, having seen Busco and Central Noble in person last week, I'm not convinced that the best 3 teams in that conference aren't in the small school division, which I don't know when the last time you could ever have said that would be. I mean, Garrett, I guess, would have an argument. But right now, the way that they're playing, man, 3 of the best, out of 10 teams, 3 of the best teams, or maybe the 3 best teams are in that small division. I mean, that's insane to me. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, look at it. I mean, you look at Fairfield and Lakeland and West Noble and Angola, and you feel like, okay, they're not in the conversation for the best teams in the conference. And you throw Garrett in there as well from the big school division. And yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's a great point because, the small school division, many people consider that the lesser division because they're big school, small school. But, this year it's been anything but. And it's a great point by you is, some of the best teams, if not the top 3 best teams in the conference, are all in that small school division. And I think you can make a case for all 3 of those to potentially win at least a sectional championship. Who knows?
That could be possible. What are you looking forward to most about week 8? I know, a lot of the conference races are decided or at least quasi-decided. So what are you looking forward to in week 8 as we get ready for, the playoffs, the playoff draw, and sectionals creeping ever so close? Now that, I don't want to say they're completely locked out, but other than the SAC, it feels like, we pretty much know who's going to win each conference championship locally.
Yeah, I think we started the year focusing on the SAC early on the first couple of weeks, and then we kind of went elsewhere, and now we're circling back around because we have Snyder Dwenger this week, and after how Dwenger played last week, really excited to see that matchup. And if Snyder can get past the Saints this week, oh, by the way, week 9 is the SAC championship game at Lewis Field. So I think all eyes are on the SAC in the area this week and next week. Really excited to see how the Saints can come out because in a matter of a couple weeks, they've become from an afterthought to a team that you can really consider looking in that sectional could be, a better team than Snyder. But we're going to find out on Friday just where they sit. And Bishop Luers is 2 wins away from locking up the SAC in their first undefeated season since the SAC expanded back to 10 teams, adding Homestead and Carroll. So a lot on the line in the next 2 weeks in the SAC.
Yeah, pretty impressive. They added 2 powerhouse 6A schools, and a 2A school can come out victorious. But Bishop Luers is just having that kind of season, man.
Yes,
they are
sir.
good, and they are fun to watch. Hopefully this was fun to watch. We will be back next Monday on Wayne.com talking week 9 as we get towards the sectionals in week 10. For Justin, I'm Glenn, and we'll see you then.